Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Mold's Family Vineyard here in the Oak Knoll district of Napa Valley. We are here at the 2014 Harvest News Conference for the Napa Valley Grape Growers. Joining us today is Allison Cellini. She is the viticulturist for Renneria Vineyard Management as well as an MVG member. Paul Goldberg is sitting in the middle, and he is vineyard manager for Bettinelli Vineyards and also sits on the Napa Valley Grape Growers Executive Committee and Board of Directors. And Garrett Buckland is also here with us today. He is a partner in Premier Viticultural Services as well as the Napa Valley Grape Growers Vice President. Today we will have a panel discussion and conversation. Please make sure you send your questions in using @NV Grape Growers on Twitter, or post your questions on Facebook using hashtag MVGHarvest, and we'll answer your questions at the end of the panel discussion. So I would like to first give the microphone to Allison. Welcome and good morning.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. As you can see, it's a beautiful day here in Napa Valley, and I'm going to give you a little overview of the great growing season that we've had for a third consecutive year here. Though it has been a bit of a roller coaster, and we've been presented with some challenges along the way, though we've been able to overcome a lot of them with a little bit of luck on timing, but also great contingency planning on the part of the growers. We went into the growing season this year, obviously very worried about the drought, and though the drought does remain a major topic of concern for the growers here, we got lucky and we received some rain in February that came at the perfect time to fill up our soil profiles. In the warm spring ended up translating into warm soils, which led us to another early bud break year very similar to 2013. The growing degree days at the beginning of harvest were almost identical to last year's growing season and have continued to track very closely through to the end of harvest. As well, the phenology tracked very closely to last year, with most growers reporting that they're seeing their harvest dates coming in about the same as last year to maybe a few days earlier. The South Napa earthquake came as harvest was starting up. I think we can all agree that we were very fortunate that it happened at the hour that it happened and prevented a higher amount of potential injuries. The majority of the impact affecting growers was of a personal nature. So a lot of the personnel in the grower community had to clean up their homes, and there were a few days there after the earthquake that people were trying to catch up and pull everything back together. As far as the grapes in Napa Valley, I don't think that a 6.0 earthquake is quite enough to shake them all the way off the vines. So harvest continued in full gear shortly after, and Napa Valley has been back open for business ever since. We had kind of a fluke of a hailstorm that happened late season in Napa the last week of September. This storm could have potentially been very devastating for growers, but since the timing was late, most of the varieties that would be susceptible to botrytis and rots had already been picked, and most growers are reporting to have come through the hailstorm unscathed. So another lucky bullet dodge there. After the hailstorm, we were gifted with some heat. This helped dry everything up really quickly. And as of now, most growers are reportedly finished harvesting or very close to it. This heat spike we experienced in the past week has been a perfect little push for those growers that were leaving their grapes hanging just a little bit longer in hopes of getting the sugars up. It really provided those growers with the hang time to have optimal ripeness. Though the heat has added a bigger push for harvesting, it has also included a push for harvesting at night or early hours of the morning so that we were able to bring all of that fruit in nice and cold to the wineries. Overall, we dodged some bullets this season. It appears that we experienced all of the obstacles thrown at us at the best time that it possibly could. We got the least amount of damage that we possibly could from the heat and from the rain and also from the earthquake. We're finding that yields are ranging a little lower to about the same as last year, but we're confident that this season's quality is going to be high, and we're really optimistic that 2014 will be another great vintage. So, Paul, want to let us know a little bit else about this harvest?
Sure. Well, thanks, Allison, for the recap. We appreciate it. Although Allison describes a few hiccups that we did have here in the valley this year, I think I can characterize this vintage as pretty slow and steady in terms of the weather. We didn't have any crazy heat spikes or any big cold snaps to report. And another aspect of our weather this year in the valley has been that we really didn't have too many lingering foggy mornings, which kind of really accelerated the ripening. And as a result, like Allison mentioned, we are looking at a bit of an early harvest. And typically, what we've seen in past vintages is that that translates usually into some pretty great wines. And that's really the result of giving winemakers a lot of options. Sometimes when we get late into the year and we're on the opposite side of the spectrum where we're harvesting late, we have to bring the grapes in due to rainfall that will potentially cause rot problems. And this year, although we have had a little bit of rainfall already, it was followed by some heat, and that dried up the rain and moisture very well, and we were able to kind of continue business as usual with harvest without any rot problems to speak of. And so we've really given winemakers this year a lot of flexibility in when they want to harvest. And if you think of wines, if you think of winemakers kind of as artists, we on a late harvest or on an early year, we're able to give them, you know, kind of all the paints on the palette. They can do whatever they want. They can harvest early if they want. They can harvest late. They can harvest right in the middle. And those kinds of decisions allow them to play with different flavors and levels of acidity and levels of sugar, which subsequently become alcohol in the wine. So we have seen, I want to report a little bit on some of the replanting that has been seen in the vineyard. In fact, we're at the beautiful Molds Vineyard this morning, and right behind us they're doing a small bit of replanting as well. It feels as if a lot of the valley is being replanted because as we drive up 29 and Silverado Trail, there are some key vineyards there that are under replant, and it feels like a big portion of the valley is being under replant right now because of the proximity to those two major thoroughfares. Although we're only experiencing about maybe 6-7% of a replant, mainly attributed to the growing economy and the fact that a lot of our vines were planted in the Napa Valley in the mid-'80s, and we're seeing that a typical lifespan of a vineyard is about 25 to 30 years. So that cycle has come up. That being said, you know, a normal replant, healthy replant would be somewhere around 3 to 4% per year being replanted through the valley. So we're slightly higher than that this year. One thing that's really exciting about seeing a lot of vineyards being replanted is that when you replant, you get a chance to do whatever you would do differently all in one shot. So even vineyards, you know, we've learned a lot over the past 5-10 years. Even vineyards that we planted 5 years ago, we'd probably do some things differently now, knowing what we know and learning what we've learned. And so after, you know, a cumulative knowledge of 30 years passes, when we replant a vineyard, the quality potential and the sustainability potential is much greater now than it was, you know, 3 decades ago. So we're excited to kind of turn over a new leaf on some of those older vineyards that have needed to be replanted over the last few years. Growers continue to invest in technology throughout the valley, mainly as a way of doing things better and more, you know, in more of a sustainable fashion. A lot of the technology that we've been implementing is remote monitoring technology, so being able to see what's going on in our vineyards at all time, including remote weather stations that are telling us all sorts of data, not just weather and climatic conditions, but all sorts of data that's coming in, you know, specific to our own vineyards. And that type of technology really allows us to make great decisions as they pertain to our own individual vineyards. We've also invested a lot on technology such as optical sorters, both in the field and in the wineries, so that we can sort the fruit even better, pull out undesirable characteristics. And over the past 5-10 years, this technology has improved greatly, and it's enabled us to make higher quality wines every year. In terms of labor this year in the Napa Valley, I'm happy to report that the Napa Valley has created the Napa Valley Farm Worker Foundation this last year, and although it's kind of been in the making for the last 5 or 6 years, we've had a lot of components in place. It was actually formalized this year as an organization with a mission to support and promote Napa Valley's vineyard workers through education and professional development. And so essentially, this organization raises money to put on very high quality viticultural classes, English seminars, safety seminars throughout the year to improve all aspects of our farm workers, both their lives and their ability to do a great job in our vineyards. Essentially because we recognize that they are the front lines of quality and sustainability out there, and so we've made a big push and a big investment in our farm workers, knowing that they're going to drive quality over the years to come. To date, we have educated over 2,600 farm workers, and through all sorts of classes, like I mentioned. And it's a extremely exciting program, and we're seeing a lot of traction, a lot of popularity, and a lot of growth, and we hope that continues. At this point, I'm going to kick it over to Garrett, and he's going to go through some other aspects of the season, and then we'll kind of roundtable at the end.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Allison. Good morning, everyone. A couple things that I'd like to touch on this year. Allison brought up a little bit about our harvest and what we're experiencing in terms of yield and the overall quality. I'm happy to report that all of our feedback is showing that our yields are probably going to end up somewhere in between 2012 and 2013 yields, which were both fairly high for us. You know, if this becomes the new normal, we're very excited about that. You know, there's a lot of dogma sometimes about yields and wine quality. These days we're seeing, you know, coming off of these last two vintages are absolutely fantastic. High yields don't always translate to any decrease in quality, and in fact this year what we're seeing is tremendous quality. All of the feedback that we've seen from winemakers is that this type of early year, this type of early ripening, independent of the crop yield, is absolutely fantastic. So I think that's a very wonderful thing for us to talk about this year. I, for one, am extremely excited about the fact that we can wrap this harvest up sometime next week, and we can go on and have a little bit of a vacation here, typically earlier than we normally do. You know, part of the reason why we are so successful in a year like this is how we manage our vineyards in response to some of the weather conditions. Allison brought up briefly some of the adverse weather conditions that one can experience while farming. Things like hail, things like extreme weather events, you know, excessive dryness or excessive heat. I'm happy to say that these days, you know, we are expecting those things, as every farmer should. We have a lot of tools at our disposal to help mitigate some of the risks that come with that. And as a result, we haven't really seen any major issues over the past few years stemming from things like high heat or dry weather or the occasional hailstorm. I'd also just like to report that there was really no damage outside of some of our urban areas. People lost their gardens and some leaves on trees and things like that. But the fruit held up really well during that hailstorm of seems like a month ago, but it was about a week and a half ago or so. So as growers here, we're always looking to respond to the changing weather conditions, changing our cultural practices, changing how we leaf, how we hedge, number of leaves we leave behind, how we irrigate or not irrigate. And some of the things that we've been doing in 2014 have been in response to some of these weather conditions. It was touched on about the drought. You know, as a sustainable industry here, we always need to be thinking about ways to cut our water usage. And I'm happy to report that through the Napa Valley Grapegrowers, we have a lot of programs and a lot of seminars that teach us exactly that. Giving giving tools to our growers to have the confidence to be able to reduce water use in their vineyard is one of the core missions of our organization. And over the seminars and programs that we put on over the past couple of years, that's been a major focus. So at least with a lot of my clients, we are able to save a significant amount of water in the vineyards just by changing our management techniques and adjusting what our final outcomes are going to be. Part of farming is kind of risk management, and so when we have these tools at our disposal, we want to use them wisely to reduce the risk or some of the problems that might come with that. More and more growers are able to reduce water, and I'm happy to say that this is something that we're always looking at here in Napa, partly because it gives us better wine quality, and we can continue to push the sustainability of our industry. So those are a few of the things that we've been focusing on quite a bit here in 2014. It was brought up about the earthquake. There's some interesting things that have happened in our valley. I think some of you have talked about this already, but we've had quite a few of our seasonal creeks start to run at least a month early, long before any rains. And that seems to be a result of the earthquake. I grew up, maybe you guys can see it just right over here in the hills behind us, and in the 2000 earthquake? The 2000 earthquake, we had a similar phenomenon where Dry Creek started to run in October when it would normally run after a few inches of rain. I think a lot of what's happening there is it's pretty violent to have a 6.0 earthquake, and that shifts some things underground. So we started to see quite a few creeks run, at least all through the southern part of Napa here, which kind of tells us a few things. There's a lot of water under our feet. Napa is extremely fortunate to have a wonderful system of aquifers here that really help us in a time of a drought, where we can help spread the difference between years where we don't maybe see enough seasonal rainfall. I am happy to report that even though we are considered in a drought, rainfall amounts through our valley vary anywhere from around 16 inches here on the valley floor all the way up to close to 30 inches in some of our hillside locations. This is something that we discuss quite a bit. We do a growing conditions report at the end of the year where we recap the season, and we look at over 25 different weather stations throughout Napa and talk with growers about the difference in these different regions. So it is very interesting. 30 inches is a lot of water. Even 16 inches is a lot of water. This is, in some cases, 40, 50, 60% more than what other areas in our state have as their normal average rainfall. So we are blessed here in Napa. It is a problem statewide for the drought, but we are better situated here in the North Coast for sure in terms of our water amounts and the fact that we have a very sustainable groundwater resource. I'd like to touch on a couple of other things as well. With this harvest and past few years, we've been seeing some increases in price for our grapes. If you are a grower and you're selling fruit, the price for cabernet and some of the other Bordeaux varieties are at kind of an all-time high, and that's a great thing for us. That is something that we love to see as growers, and as wineries, I think part of that high price, it means that our growers are able to do all of the cultural practices in the vineyard that are required of having some of the world's best wine here. And so this is something that we like to see. The value of this crop will be very high, very close to the past 2 years. And I think this is something that all of us are very, very happy about. Changing gears a little bit, we have a very exciting program coming up for the Napa Valley Grapegrowers, which is our seminars and exhibition and symposium that we call ROOTSTOCK. It's a new name for us. It's something we've been doing every year at this time, which is getting together all of the growers in the end of harvest here. The date for this is November 13th. And we're holding this at the Napa County Fairgrounds, the Expo. And I'm very excited this year. We've rebranded this event. We have a tremendous list of speakers and really cool programs here. It's essentially focused on elevating wine quality and sustainability throughout our industry. You can go to napagrowers.org for more info on the event, and we're expecting a sellout crowd, and this is something we really look forward to. It is a program that you have to attend if you want to be making the world's best wines. So I think one thing that I'd like to add before we take some questions here is, what do we expect over the next couple seasons? And if we had a crystal ball, what would that look like? That's always a hard thing to say. I would say that my opinion here is that the strides that we've made over the past 10 years in our industry are tremendous. Our quality is getting better year after year. Our growers are becoming smarter and more efficient about dealing with inclement weather, dealing with some of the issues that arise in our vineyards, whether that's pest and disease, inclement weather, challenging crop yields, things like that. So I would expect the Napa Valley to, again, make major strides in sustainability, major strides in the quality of wines that we're putting out. And I, for one, am extremely excited about not only this year, next year, and the next 10 years. Do either of you want to add to the crystal ball conversation?
Allison, I think you might have hit it all there in one sentence. Maybe we could take some questions.
First, do we have any questions for those of you that are in the audience today?
Sure, I'll ask a question. Could you talk? I've been hearing, and you mentioned maybe, Garrett, about the price of grapes that are increasing, especially Cabernet, of pressure to grow Cabernet in maybe regions that aren't hospitable to Cabernet, and kind of the effects of that you maybe see, especially here in Napa, about certain regions are better to grow Cabernet than others, and maybe the push, just given the price of Cabernet, is still growing.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. When you look across the entire world and you look where Cabernet has grown, there are some vast differences in the types of growing regions that they can be grown in. We have Bordeaux as a reference, as sometimes people use as the model for Cabernet. Much cooler, much wetter, extremely different climate than here. And so Cabernet, like most grapes, can be grown in a variety of different locations. There is always a pressure as prices go up for people to consider putting Cabernet in areas where it may not be the A+ wine that you would expect. I'm happy to say that almost everywhere in Napa here, even places we don't traditionally plant it, the weather trumps a lot of those decisions. So we're always making good wine from it. And that's one thing that you'll always find in Napa, is that there will always be a good wine. Whether it's an A+ wine or not, that's something that the rest of us need to figure out how to make happen in some of those areas. Napa is a cab place, but the beauty of our weather, our soils here, is that it does give us flexibility to have all kinds of different varieties. And I'm happy to say that I think right now the danger of people overstepping there and putting Cabernet where it's quote not supposed to be is not very high. It's something that every grower would look into first and evaluate whether or not they can make a good wine from it.
The chickens like that answer too.
Oh,
we
yeah,
have we have the Mold's Family Vineyard chicken coop right next to where we are today for those who are watching. Any other questions from the audience?
I have a question.
Okay.
At the recent Wine Financial Symposium, Bob Smiley gives reports and partial responses from industry leaders. There was one that had no other attribution but from somebody in the Napa Valley in the forecast of what he thought would be happening 5 years later. One of the things he brought up was that there would have to be some way to get people up and down the valley, that there would be locals trying to block the access of tourists, of buyers, of whatever. Obviously, there's points and issues on both sides, but you have to do your work, and you can't be clogged. And a friend of mine, a vineyard manager, has almost run over a bicyclist driving out in the middle of Silverado Trail without a clue what's going on. Any thoughts in general about tourism?
Maybe we could tag team
Yeah,
it.
we'll do both.
Okay. Yeah, over the last couple of years, we have seen increased tourism, attributed to a lot of things, I think. But I've heard quite a few stories. One of which, in the winter, typically our down season, there wasn't too much snow in the Sierras, and therefore a lot of Bay Area folks that would typically be skiing were coming to the Napa Valley. That kind of we saw a steady pace of traffic during the winter, and as the economy grows a little bit more, I think we've had more visitors now. There's a couple of bottleneck areas in Napa that have surfaced. The traffic I wouldn't call unbearable by any means, but when you're used to kind of no traffic at all, any traffic kind of becomes an issue or a problem. So there has been some road work done down in South County, opening up the Jameson Canyon corridor to more lanes, which has helped quite a bit, getting people into the valley. But we as tourism increases or even stays at the levels that we're at now, we'll continue to see a couple of sticky areas on the 29 and Silverado Trail corridors.
Yeah, I think Paul summarizes that fairly well. This is something, to our own success in this valley. This is something that we obviously need to, come up with creative solutions for. This is something that the NVG is actively involved in as a partner in our community. Sustainable development, sustainable growth, and a sustainable industry means that we address these types of topics. I am happy to say, at least for the bicycling portion of it, there have been some major movement on the Vine Trail and some of the things that would alleviate those pressures. We always encourage everybody, whether we're local or not, to obey traffic laws. I think that's a good thing. And this concept about being a partner in our valley, we all live and work here. Our business is here, and so nobody cares about these questions more than we do. And I think what we'll see is some very creative solutions to this. But again, this is part of our own success, and we're going to be the ones to help solve some of those questions.
All right, we'll take a Twitter question. Are there any new specific viticultural practices being adopted in the Napa Valley to increase quality that you haven't mentioned?
I'll share that one. Okay. I think, on our continuous quest to improve quality and sustainability here in Napa, we're seeing that we're making more passes through the vineyard on an annual basis to improve our vineyards through cultural practices. And a lot of that has to do with canopy management, exposing the clusters to the perfect amount of sunlight at different times of the year. We know has some drastic effects on the overall wine quality. So I think there's a great focus on that.
Just to add to what Paul said, we have a lot of different practices coming into play with different growers all the time. One thing that I could say about Napa in the last 5 years is precision. The viticulture has begun to become more precise, relying more on soil maps and NDVIs and infrareds, and just trying to dial in one vineyard block very precisely instead of doing the same practices in the whole block. We see a lot of growers at Renteria, we're doing it, and I know you guys are all doing it, kind of blocking out different sections, weak zones and strong zones, and applying different viticultural practices throughout the season to those zones to make them live up to their full potential rather than just uniformly going through the block. So that's one that I can add.
Yeah, I think both wonderful points there. I think the only thing to add to this is that with educating our growers, more and more people now are making really good decisions about the types of wines that they want to be making, and working on the changes that they can do in the vineyard to make that wine different. And that's a bunch of small things, not one thing directly to the question there. There's not one thing there. It's just changing a whole bunch of all these little things, kind of levering the vineyard in one direction or the other, is something that we're all becoming better at. And I would think it's the new normal now for people to consider these things. Gone are the days where we farm like our neighbor did, or we farm like we used to. Each year we're thinking about these things in a very comprehensive manner, thinking about our efficiency, thinking about ways to get these done in the vineyard. As Paul alluded to earlier, one of the biggest things is when we do get a chance to replant these vineyards, we are incorporating this body of knowledge back into our replants that allow us to not have to go through the vineyard so many times, be efficient, and get the same outcome for a lower input. And I think that's something that we can really applaud.
All right. Along the same lines of new technology, we have a Twitter question. When are we going to see drones over the vineyards?
I'll take that one. This is good. It's very, very interesting. I think the looking at remote sensing in a vineyard, doing hyperspectral imagery, has been something that's been fairly commonplace for us for at least 15 to 20 years, at least 20 years. Now that currently happens on a camera attached to a plane. With a drone, I guess all we're talking about is downsizing the vehicle that takes that image. And so I think we're always interested in ways to look at the broader picture, look at our vineyards in a different light. And if this is the technology for that, I think that would be helpful. There's probably some regulatory hurdles to get there first.
All right. Well, thank you so much to all three of our speakers and to everybody who streamed this conference from home and joined us here today. We want to say thanks, and here's to a great vintage.